John McLean.
Yep.
You're all set. He came through in 1858 and he went over the hill over here where he had a great view of the upper Clutha Valley, as it were, looking over to Wanaka and down to Cromwell. And he thought, well, this is lovely sheep country, hurried back to what was then the waste, what they call it, something waste board, to apply for this area, only to find that it had been at that stage split into 4 different blocks. But he was shrewd enough to put down his 2 brothers' name and his sister, and so they were allocated this, and it covered 352,000 acres, twice the size of what our big place Molesworth is today. They called it Movern Hills after the hills in Argyll in Scotland, and the southern property they called Ardgour, also after the hills of Ardgour, of Argyll. They farmed it for something like, they sold it in 1876, 74, and I think that they had the best years of this era in that when they came through there were no trees that you see today. The only trees were birch up in the high part of Forest Range behind you, and there were no rabbits and there was no Horatium. And I think they saw the rabbit plague coming. It moved up from Invercargill, that's where they were first liberated down in Southland. So they got out. But what I didn't say this morning was when he retired, he built a home at Redcastle out of Oamaru, and that today is St Kevin's College. Also, the clock tower in Oamaru was given by his nephew, a fellow Buckley, to his memories. So he still, he was quite a character obviously, and he was on the local council, and the story is told that he was being heckled, and he said, if you don't be quiet, he said, I'll give you a great big much more. Think of it. But however, then it was sold to a fellow, Colonel Whitmore from Hawke's Bay, whom I don't think ever set foot on the place, and he only held it for a short time, and he in turn sold it again to a fellow from Lauder Station, and he only held it for a year, and Dalgetty's, the big firm, took over. And Dalgetty's ran the place until 1910, which they're celebrating today. But during that time there was a succession of managers, and they had some awful snows. One particular year they lost 45,000 sheep, and as I read out that thing today, they skinned a lot of those sheep and sent the skins to Dunedin. So, and the 1910 subdivision, when most of these properties came off, but strangely enough, Dalgetty's in the last did not sell Movern Hills or Forest Range directly opposite. And my father, who was only a musterer in that early period, he and his good friend George Henderson drew these 2 properties. But from what I can gather, the musterers in those early days only came into the station for their supplies. Yardmen took over the sheep for the shearing and all the different aspects, and the musterers kept going. They had a tent on a pack horse, they got their supplies and they kept moving. it would be as cold as hell sometimes. So that's the story there.
That's a rough. How did Tarras come to be about? Because
Well, Tarras was named by John Turnbull Thompson after Tarras Waters in Tarras Waters is just out from Dumfries in Scotland at a little place called Langholm, and there is Tarras Waters there, and I've been there, and it is very similar to our terrace without trees. So that's Tarras. But just to tell you a little story, I gave a talk to the school children, and I said, does anybody know how Tarras got its name? And one little fellow said, yes, God named it. And I said, well, that's a very good story, but it's not quite right. And our Presbyterian minister, Catherine Little in Wanaka, who used to come to the Tarras school once a month, she said, well, at least I'm getting through to them. Yes, and
how did the actual township of Tarras spring up, though? You know, it's a long
well,
way from
I dare say there was a store. They set up a store. Movern Hills was the focal point in that very early period. Everything went from here. They had a school here. They had their New Year's sports, because when they had, I'm not saying they had 34 shearers, but they had a lot of shearers. They had a lot of shed hands, cooks and so forth. So they made their own fun, as it were. And Tarras no doubt started with a little store, shop or something like that. Yeah.